What's up, everybody? We are back with another video. Today we are talking about the history of a once great brand that has become bland, boring, and struggling, and that is Mitsubishi. Mitsubishi is known for mostly its great cars in the Lancer Evolutions, but you had the Galant, you had the regular Pajero and Montero in the US and other markets, Shogun and other markets. The Pajero Evolution that's behind me. Mitsubishi at one point made some really great cars. At one point they were the best automaker in Japan, but nowadays they're just kind of swooped under Renault, Nissan, and don't really offer much on the market. They're a pretty boring brand, but they do have a somewhat interesting history. We're not going to touch too much in the motorsports history. I think I'm going to make a separate video on that just because there's so much to talk about, especially in the WRC and the Dakar rally scene. But we're going to talk about the major parts of Mitsubishi's history. We won't get too detailed into scandals and all of that, just some really major stuff. But let's go ahead and jump into Mitsubishi's history. So Mitsubishi was originally established in 1870 by Iwasaki Yataro. I'm probably butchering that. It was originally a shipping firm named Tsukuba Shakai, and that was their main primary focus. But in order to increase profitability, they began to diversify into fields related to shipping, such as shipbuilding, a coal mining yard to fuel the ships that they built, an iron mill to supply the iron for the ships, and all sorts of different shipbuilding and shipping related industries, even including shipping insurance companies for large ships, for large like cargo ship shipping. Then in 1917, the Mitsubishi Shipbuilding Company decided to build a passenger car and introduced the Mitsubishi Model A, the first series production car in Japan. It was hand built and it was based off of the Fiat Typo 3. It was expensive compared to the European and American models, and it was discontinued in 1921. They only managed to build 22 in those 4 years. So overall, the first Mitsubishi vehicle was really seen as a failure. But in 1934, Mitsubishi Shipbuilding merged with Mitsubishi Aircraft and became Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, a name that is still in existence today, and they were the largest private company in Japan. MHI was mainly focused on aircrafts, ships, railroad cars, and machinery, but in 1937 they developed the PX-33, a prototype military sedan, and that actually was Japan's first full-time passenger. That was Japan's first passenger vehicle with full-time four-wheel drive, obviously, so it could be used out in the field for the military where you could have mud or snow or sand or whatever. So during World War II, Mitsubishi just focused on the war effort with the shipbuilding and the aircraft and that PX-33, but they weren't in the passenger car industry because as it was in Germany and Britain and America and all the countries that were involved and Russia in World War II, all of the industries were focused on the war effort and not really on the consumer industries other than the absolute basic needs of the citizenry. So after World War II, Mitsubishi Heavy Industries returned to passenger vehicles with the Fuso Bus Company. They also created the Mitsushima. It was a three-wheeled cargo vehicle, just a small cargo carrier for like around cities and stuff, and the Silver Pigeon scooter, but not yet cars. That was just to get back on their feet. And then in the 1950s, the Allied powers, while they were still in control of Japan and deciding how to handle Japan, post-war after Japan had surrendered, MHI was broken up along with all of the other family-controlled industrial conglomerates in Japan. MHI became West Japan Heavy Industries, Central Japan Heavy Industries, and East Japan Heavy Industries. They all had some involvement in motor vehicle development, but none of them were purely dedicated to that. East Japan Heavy Industries imported the Henry J sedan made by Kaiser Motors from America. I know Kaiser sounds like it would be German. From 1951 and sold them until 1954. And in 1954, Central Japan Heavy Industries made a deal with Willys, which was now owned by Kaiser, to sell their own version of the Jeep CJ30 3Bs, and they actually sold those all the way until '98 when Willys and then Jeep and all that decided that they were no longer going to make those, and MHI at that time, I guess it was MMC even, had to move on from that. So there wasn't too much going on in the 1950s for Mitsubishi. I mean, there wasn't a lot for Japan. There was still a lot of Allied control, and there was a lot of limits in what Japan was allowed to create and industrialize. But in the 1960s, Japan's economy was finally starting to do well again. And now that Japan's economy was doing well, the average Japanese person had more money, had the availability of a better lifestyle, and family cars and family motoring were on the rise. And so now there was more of a need for cars for private citizens and family. So Central Japan Heavy Industries, which was now Shin Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, introduced the Mitsubishi 500, their first mass market sedan, in order to fill the needs of the rising economy and the family car industry. In 1962, they introduced, and I'm going to butcher this too, the Minica K car. In 1963, we got the Colt 1000, which was the start of the Colt name, which was somewhat famous. And in 1964, for their large luxury sedan market, they introduced the Debonair. In 1964, also, West Japan Heavy Industries was now Mitsubishi Shipbuilding and Engineering. East Japan Heavy Industries, which was now Mitsubishi Nihon Heavy Industries, and Shin Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, remerged to reform Mitsubishi Heavy Industries like they had been prior to the Allied powers breaking up the conglomerates. And in 1969, we got the very first Galant, another famous nameplate from Mitsubishi. In 1970, Mitsubishi wanted to create a singular spin-off operation to focus purely on the automotive industry, and that's when we got the Mitsubishi Motors Corporation, which is what is still in existence in some form today. And to raise money to create more vehicles and manufacture more vehicles, Mitsubishi Motors in 1971 sold 15% ownership to Chrysler, so that way they could get more money, and it was an entry point to begin selling vehicles in the US, where Chrysler began to sell the Galant as the Dodge Colt, and eventually, as Dodge was paring down their lineup, as I talked about in my History of Dodge video, which I will link down below if you're interested in that, they eventually started to sell the Galant as the Dodge Challenger. And then in 1973, we got our very first Lancer to fill the small sedan role. They had K cars, they had their larger sedan with the Colt, but they needed the Lancer to fill into the smaller sedan market right in between. And then in 1978, Mitsubishi Motors annual production had grown all the way to 965,000. They were, at this point, they were the largest automaker at this point in Japan. And so now Chrysler was starting to feel like they were being encroached on by Mitsubishi in the subcompact markets around the world, because Mitsubishi was selling more and more globally, because obviously 965,000 units a year would be a lot for Japan in 1978. And so Chrysler, despite the partnership, was starting to get a little bit irritated with Mitsubishi. Then just a couple years later, in 1980, Mitsubishi achieved the 1 million unit annual production mark, a huge mark at that time for them, as they were continuing to grow and grow into a big manufacturer. In 1982, Mitsubishi finally started to sell cars under the Mitsubishi name in the US, with the Tradia sedan, the Corgia coupe, and the Starion coupe. The Starion we also saw, and now I'm forgetting what other name it was, but it was sold as Dodge something, which I should have noted down, but the Starion coupe is a really cool car. I actually really like the Starions. And in 1982, Mitsubishi began selling the first Pajero. That was when the first generation Pajero came. It was not the Montero yet in the US, but still a significant model to note. In 1985, Chrysler and Mitsubishi created DSM as a 50-50 venture partnership, Diamond Star Motors, DSM. We got some famous DSM cars. There wasn't too much from DSM, which we'll talk about here in a minute, or why we'll talk about in a minute. In 1988, the DSM plant was completed. It had an annual capacity of 240,000 units per year, and it began producing the Mitsubishi Eclipse, which was also the Eagle Talon and also the Plymouth Laser. Some pretty famous cars. We got some pretty cool versions of those cars, and I really like the first couple generations of those cars. And then in 1989, Mitsubishi reached the big 1.5 million unit annual production mark as they continued to grow and grow. In 1991, as Chrysler was continuing to rift with Mitsubishi, they sold their equity stake in DSM and they completely divested all of their shares by 1993 and no longer had anything to do with Chrysler. In between 91 and 93, there were some contractual relationships to supply parts for each other, but the relationship ended in 1993. In 1991, in that time, we did get the Mitsubishi 3000 GT sold in America from 91 to 96, which was also rebadged under Dodge as the Dodge Stealth, which we got from 91 to 98. I love the 3000 GT. I think it is an underrated, slept-on 90s JDM sports car when we're looking at the 300ZX and the Supra and the RX-7 and the 300ZX. I think the Mitsubishi 3000 GT and the Dodge Stealth, although not quite as agile, a little bit heavier than those other cars in general, was a really cool car, and it's a shame that it's a slept-on as it is. Then in 1992, Mitsubishi was doing so well due to the success of the Diamante sedan they were selling and the Pajero, which is one of the few SUVs at this point. They had actually started to plan a hostile takeover and acquisition of Honda as Honda was struggling a bit. But Honda took drastic steps to increase profitability and avoided the hostile takeover. But we did almost have a Mitsubishi-owned Honda, and in another timeline, it would have been interesting to see how that plays out, considering how successful Honda has been in the 90s and 2000s and 2010s, although they're starting to struggle a little bit now in the 20s. It would have been interesting to see if they were still a success under Mitsubishi, or if Mitsubishi might have been more of a success because of owning Honda. But we mentioned the success of the Pajero. Japanese companies were looking at America and the growing trend of SUV popularity, and they didn't think that that would take over in Japan, and I would guess a lot of that was probably because there were so many small roads, especially in Japanese cities. That's why they have K cars and trucks and vans. But Mitsubishi leaned into the SUV craze and actually increased their budget and development for the SUV. In 94, we saw the Pajero Mini K SUV. We saw in 95 the Pajero Junior, which was smaller than the Pajero, bigger than the Pajero Mini. It was replaced in 98 by the Pajero I.O., while we still had the full-size Pajero. Before that, while Mitsubishi was focusing on SUVs, we also got the first Lancer Evolution in 1992 as a homologation special for the World Rally Championship, which we know then led to a long line of really cool Evos. Homologation special through either 6 or 7, I believe it was 7, but really cool. One of the most famous nameplates came out in 1992. And then also on the homologation front in 1997, we got the Pajero Evolution, which this is a 1997 behind me, so they could homologate for the Dakar Rally, which we will have a Pajero history video at some point, as well as a motorsports history video, which will include Dakar. But fun fact, the winningest manufacturer in Dakar history is still Mitsubishi with 12 total titles. But the 90s was really the beginning of the end of the specialness of Mitsubishi. You know, we got Evos for a while, but there wasn't really anything super special after that. We'll talk about it. We'll talk about the 2000s, but into the 2000s, the Eclipse became less cool and less performance-y. The Montero only ever got the Pajero Evolution and then exited the U.S. market after, I believe it's the third generation. And it was the beginning of the end of Mitsubishi. Some of that end was spurred in 2000 when there was 4 vehicle defects that Mitsubishi was knowingly manufacturing with and covering up for, and those were publicized. And by 2004, Mitsubishi confessed to another 26 vehicle defects that they were manufacturing for as far back as 1977, including like brakes and fuel-related things and really important things for vehicles. And so that ruined them financially. They had to recall a lot of vehicles and fix them for free. There was a lot of trust loss in Mitsubishi Motors. So in 2005, Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, which owned parts of Mitsubishi Motor Company, along with the Mitsubishi Corporation and the Mitsubishi Tokyo Financial Group, participated in a 450 billion yen package to save Mitsubishi Motor Company. And as part of that package for 50 billion yen, the Mitsubishi Heavy Industries Group increased their ownership of Mitsubishi Motor Company, so many Mitsubishis here, and making MMC officially an affiliate under MHI again. And so now MMC, while it was mostly independent, is now under the control of Mitsubishi Heavy Industries again. But it all ended up being for the good, because in the third quarter of 2006, Mitsubishi reported its first profitable quarter in 4 years and had its first profitable year in years. So it ended up being a good thing for Mitsubishi financially to save them from being completely dissolvent. And then in 2009, Mitsubishi tried to get ahead of the EV game and took their Mitsubishi IK car and turned it into an attempt at an EV, the iMiev, which had barely any range, was super slow. You lost a lot of range by just doing simple stuff like turning on the AC and the headlights and stuff. And it was really a failure of a vehicle, but it was the beginning of an EV market where, Tesla revolutionized the EV market and really blew it up. But Mitsubishi was there early with the iMiev, trying something like so many brands we had seen with like Volkswagen, and there was an EV RAV4, and Mitsubishi's first attempt was in 2009 with the iMiev, which was the Mitsubishi, why am I forgetting what the innovative electrical vehicle, I believe it is. I'll put it on the screen, but the iMiev was a pretty bad EV, a horrible EV, a horrible car, and pretty much a failure. So with Mitsubishi struggling, in 2010, Mitsubishi and Nissan formed a joint venture to develop K cars to sell in Japan, obviously, because I believe that's the only market with the K cars. There might be some K cars that leak into other markets. Like I think there's some that leak into like maybe Europe, but they developed that joint venture specifically for the Japan market. And during that partnership in 2016, Nissan discovered discrepancies in the fuel consumption data that Nissan was reporting, which was another crisis, or that Mitsubishi was reporting, which was another crisis for Mitsubishi. You could make a whole video just on their crises, especially from the 2000 on. They've had CEOs and presidents and all that. Goshen, I believe was his name, was put in jail over scandals. But this resulted in Nissan acquiring a 34% controlling stake in Mitsubishi Motoring Company, which entered Mitsubishi into the Renault-Nissan-Mitsubishi alliance. And then in 2016, the Evo 10 ceased production. It was the last Evo and the last exciting car that Mitsubishi sold. And now Mitsubishi is only selling the Outlander plug-in hybrid, the Outlander Sport, and the Eclipse Cross. Just boring, mediocre crossovers, SUVs, whatever. And it's 2026 now, and their plans are, as of sometime in 2026 or going into 2027, to no longer even have their own platforms and sell all of their vehicles on Nissan platforms, which I believe the Outlander PHEV or the Outlander Sport, maybe both of them, or the Eclipse Cross. I don't think the regular Outlander is, but I believe it is the Outlander plug-in hybrid that is already on Nissan architecture. And so Mitsubishi is really kind of dead. They were once arguably the most significant brand in Japan, the most significant Japanese brand in the world. They created some of the favorite cars of enthusiasts, the Evo 1 through 9 and the 10, the Pajero Evolution, the DSM cars with the Eclipse. We had the 3000 GT, a lot of really cool cars. They had a lot of success in motorsport, which, like I said, make sure you're subscribed because a motorsport video will be coming. They had a lot of success in motorsports. Once a really cool, really powerful brand is now almost dead in the water to the point where they're not even going to be developing their own vehicle platforms anymore and just rebodiing and rebadging Nissans. It's a shame to see a brand that was once so glorious be pretty much dead in the water and be a namesake only, which I, at this rate, believe this decade will fully disappear. I think that Nissan, who is also not doing awesome right now, and Renault, which doesn't even have a presence in America, will, although we're supposed to start getting one at some point, will look at Mitsubishi as not a moneymaker and just a waste of money. And I think we will see the end of Mitsubishi in the 2020s. At best for Mitsubishi, early 2030s, unless we see something really change. So that's the history of Mitsubishi. I certainly learned a lot researching this video. If you learned anything, or you found anything interesting, or I got anything wrong and you need to correct me, let me know what you think in the comments down below. And please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell if you like car content. We do a mix of car reviews, car history, car ranking lists, just talking about cars a lot. So if you like that, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell so you see it and you see it first. But I will see you in the next video. Thank you so much for watching. Have a good day. Bye.